Bom, boa tarde a todos. É um prazer estar aqui no Instituto de Estudos Avançados da Universidade de São Paulo, dando início mais a esse evento. Esse evento que nós estamos fazendo agora, essa lecture, essa palestra, faz parte de uma iniciativa do grupo de pesquisa Resiliência Financeira em Cidades Contemporâneas, que nós hoje temos o prazer e contamos com o apoio do EA, de trazer aqui ao vivo o professor Tony Bovaird, da Universidade de Birmingham, professor emérito da Universidade de Birmingham, que nos honra com a presença e participa como colaborador de um projeto de pesquisa que estamos conduzindo aqui no IEA. And Professor, we welcome you here at the Institute of Advanced Studies at the University of São Paulo. Thank you so much for being engaged and involved with our research project. Please, the floor is yours. I just remember, sorry, the people from the online audience, as pessoas online, que vocês podem enviar perguntas para o e-mail iea@usp.br, iea@usp.br, que nós passaremos aqui para o professor Tony. Tony, please. Thank you.
Obrigado, André. Boa tarde a todos. Unfortunately, I have to speak in English because my Portuguese is not sufficient. I'm very privileged to be here. I'm very grateful to Professor André Aquino and his colleagues for this invitation, and I'm hoping for a dialogue about co-production, which is a movement, a set of ideas which has become very popular in many parts of the world, but is still relatively new in some ways and relatively undeveloped. So we're part of a developing set of thoughts and practices which could possibly, I believe, be of great value to public services and the public sector. I come from the University of Birmingham, although I'm now emeritus, so I don't work full-time there. I'm a director of Governance International, which is a non-profit organization working throughout Europe and other parts of the world. We've been recently working in Brasilia here, and we are delighted to be developing a cooperation with the University of São Paulo through Professor André Aquino and his colleagues. We work mainly in co-production. Although we work in all aspects of public governance, co-production has become the area in which we do most of our research and our training and our consultancy work, because it has become such a topic of interest to the public sector in many countries. I have a question for you. With an online audience, it's not so easy for you to reach out to the person sitting beside you because they may be 300 kilometers away. And normally in a lecture room I say, talk to the person beside you. And my question is, look, here is a man who has visual impairment, almost blind. What do you think he needs most? What outcomes does he most desire for his life? Yeah, what's most important to him? Normally I would pause here and there would be a buzz of conversation, but with the online audience that's not so practical. What I expect to hear after 30 seconds or 45 seconds is somebody in the audience saying, why don't you ask him? And then I say, we did ask him. What do you think he said? And then people typically say, well, he wants some equipment, he needs some support, he needs some public services, he needs his house to be more practical or his flat so that he can find things easily. And respect, but thank you very much, respect. And then we say, we did some research. And first of all, we did some research with a non-profit organization that works with people who are visually impaired. And first we asked the staff, what do you think this person wants? And they said, 64% said, more information about public services for people who are visually impaired, and 54% said, more information about specific support and equipment, etc. And 36% said, he wants to get to know people and make friends. But when we asked the service users, the clients of the non-profit, they gave a different answer. 91% said get to know people and make friends. And 62% said talk with someone about personal issues. That's even more deep, even more private, even more demanding. Not just a friend, but somebody you can be quite honest with about important things. Of course, they do want information about public services and specific support. So it turns out two things. They're just like us. We're all looking for contact and social relationships and friends. That's why the internet became so powerful, so fast. It offers contact. But another thing, the staff of this non-profit were not necessarily the best people to provide friendship and contact. Some of them were boring. Some of them, no doubt, were slightly nasty. Some of them were just uninterested in the clients. But the other clients were important in helping to form networks. And of course, the community is important in helping to form networks. But here is a difficult point. The staff of this non-profit were not very good at connecting the clients of the service to each other or to the community, to the sorts of people who might be helpful. So the professional staff are not the only people who can improve the outcomes of people with visual impairment, but they might help. That's what we're talking about today, co-production, where we get citizens to help each other, service users to help each other, communities to help service users, and service users to help communities, because they also have gifts and talents and capabilities which are unused. So I've already started, really, this discussion of what is co-production and why it matters. We have a definition of co-production in Governance International. It says it takes two, professionals and communities, and specifically, co-production is about professionals and citizens making better use of each other's assets, resources, contributions, capabilities, talents, gifts, to achieve better outcomes and improved efficiency. It's collaboration. It's about synergy. You know, this wet cold fish and this cold potato, uninteresting. But with synergy, you have fish and chips. Don't worry, I have a Brazilian example here with this boring arroz branca and this farofa. You have feijoada. So, synergy is important here. Mind you, we say that's our definition. We believe with all organizations we work with, you should find your own definition of co-production. That's valuable for you. But the idea is collaboration between professionals and citizens to make use of each other's talents. It takes two. To make use of each other's capabilities, because we all have unused capabilities. And that's part of the secret here. We believe that our staff are not fully used. Their empathy, for example, is not fully engaged in what they do. And the capabilities of our service users are often not known. We spend so much time working out their needs. We're great at needs assessment. We have long lists. We have tick boxes. We have assessment systems. But assessing what they can offer, what they're good at, is something that we seem to have neglected. What isn't co-production of public services? Well, in this traditional 2x2 matrix, you can see a box, traditional public services, which have, and in this box there's high involvement of service professionals and low involvement of service users and communities. And there's another box that says self-help. This is life in the community without any interference from the public sector. High involvement of citizens, low involvement of public services. And, you know, this isn't an unimportant box. This is a box where people fall in love. No involvement of the public sector. It's the box where they have children and love their children and help their neighbors and stuff. This is not unimportant. And the co-production box is the box where there is a high involvement of both, so it's different. High involvement of citizens and public service professionals. And that tells you something interesting. There are two ways into co-production. The typical public service way into co-production, because we are fascinated by what we do, we're obsessed by how important we are, we think we need to bring citizens into our work. So from the traditional public service box, we move into co-production by bringing citizens into our work. And that's a very important thing to do. It's a worthy thing to do. I'm going to say we've got great examples of that. There is one disadvantage from this approach, and that is that our work is incredibly boring to many ordinary people, to citizens. So doing co-production in that way, bringing them into our work, has a limitation to it. It has a great advantage, though. In 2018, across the world, we're short of money in the public sector. So maybe bringing citizens into our work will sometimes allow us to do things more cheaply, because we use their capabilities, their assets, their resources, and we may be able to use fewer public sector resources. So this could be helpful in efficiency. It could be helpful in a period of austerity. And that leads some people to say co-production is just a plot to decrease the role of the state and save money. I want to argue that's not necessarily the case, although it's one possible scenario. But look at the other way into co-production, from self-help. How would it be if we looked at civil society, the self-help, the self-organization that's occurring, and we said to ourselves, each of those people out there, each of those families out there, each of those groups out there could be more effective, could have higher outcomes, if only our public service gave them a little bit of support, a little bit of advice, a little bit of education, a little bit of professional input when they needed something. Isn't it possible that the outcomes from civil society, the outcomes from self-help and self-organization might be much higher? I think that's the other way into co-production. We go out and we add value to what they do in life. And that could be dramatically valuable. One small disadvantage, it could cost a fortune, because there are tens of millions of them, each of whom would benefit from a little bit, 5 minutes of your time. But that would add up. So you see, co-production is not necessarily about saving money. It might just be about making the world a much better place, but slightly expensively, yeah. So this diagram, I think, shows you there are different trajectories, different pathways toward co-production. And we see co-production as part of a public value model that is fundamentally about creating individual outcomes and community outcomes and business outcomes. It's about user value added, about social value added, it's about economic value added. In our society, there are expressed demands from citizens which politicians look at and apply priorities to. That's a key role of politicians, to prioritize. And that gives us a definition of needs. In the old days, we went from needs to the services that we would commission in the public sector. But nowadays we realize there's an intermediate stage. Some of those needs can be met simply by behavior change. We don't necessarily need services, and we've come to realize that changing people's behavior is a very important part. Subjects like obesity, for example, it's not necessarily about public services. It might be about eating less or eating better. Yeah. Looking after your teeth. You know, we have in the room here a famous professor of dentistry, and no doubt he believes that teeth fundamentally require good dentists. But it's also possible that if you brush your teeth in the morning and in the evening and don't leave awful sweet food around, etc., behavior change could help. And behavior change directly changes outcomes, individual outcomes, community outcomes. In this case, for dentistry, it's individual outcomes. One other intermediate factor between meeting needs and setting up public services is co-production, getting citizens to do things with us. And that co-production in itself raises people's self-worth, self-esteem, their contact network. That can increase outcomes directly. But of course, behavior change and co-production do contribute to more effectively designed commissioned services. Those services have to be delivered by public organizations, private businesses, social enterprises, etc. And those public services impact directly on the outcomes, the user value, the social value, the economic value that we talked of. So we see co-production as not just something valuable in itself, potentially valuable in itself, but part of a wider public value model for the public sector, for public services. Distinctive principles of co-production, there's a big literature on this, but it comes down largely to saying we see citizens, in co-production, we see citizens as active contributors, bringing together their skills and experience to match those of professionals. No longer are they simply the victims of public services, the passive subjects of public services. They are part of the solution, not just part of the problem. Secondly, it's about collaboration, treating people not paternalistically, but as people with extremely valuable contributions to make, doing public services with the public, not to the public. And thirdly, it's about achieving outcomes that the public wants, not just public services that we're professional and expert at delivering. We divide co-production in our work, Governors International, in our research programs and in our training. We divide it into 4 different dimensions of co-production: co-commissioning, co-design, co-delivery, and co-assessment. Co-commissioning is about agreeing the priorities for public services, the priorities for public outcomes. It's a planning function that citizens can contribute valuably to. Co-design is about making the services that we agree on fit the needs of individual groups. It's a more micro-level activity. Co-delivery is about having public services partly delivered by the public because they're good at it. And co-assessment is about getting the voice of citizens to tell us what works and what doesn't work, what's good and what's bad, what needs to change. And immediately you can see there's 2 different types of co-production behind our 4 co's. There's citizen voice, that's where they help us in the co-commissioning, the planning. Co-design, where they make the services more suitable. Co-assessment, where they tell us what's good or bad. Those are citizen voice activities in co-production. And then there's co-delivery, which is where they do things. And the people who do things don't always want to come to meetings. They don't always enjoy blah blah with others. They don't come basically to be able to stand up and talk for 5 minutes about how brilliant they are and how their ideas should be running the municipality or the health service. And similarly, the people who talk in co-commissioning, in co-design, and in co-assess, they sometimes run away when you say, well, let's do something together now that we've had this discussion. They are different sorts of people. And I'm not suggesting citizen action is superior to citizen voice. I think we need both. But we should recognize they're not the same people. They are quite different target groups. They're quite different types of activity. But they're similarly about bringing citizens into the improvement of outcomes and the improvement of services. I've got some slides which talk about co-commissioning approaches, co-planning, identifying priorities with citizens. Orçamento participativo is a famous example. Brazil is one of the most famous places in the world for OP. The personalization agenda, the Bolsa Familia, where individual families can commission the most important services for them because they have the budget to decide what to do with it. That's a kind of micro co-commissioning. Appointing service users and other citizens to procurement panels so that their voice is important in deciding who should deliver services and what exactly should the specification of services be. And even co-financing of services is sometimes practiced. The so-called crowdfunding, which is becoming more important in many parts of the world. I have an example of co-commissioning of services. I think this is perhaps a little brave, talking about participatory budgeting in Brazil, but this is an example from Berlin, which I think is intriguing because it reminds us how things have changed. In the old days, when there was a little bit of growth in the budget each year, you simply asked citizens in OP, how should we spend the extra money? What are the priorities? And that's something that citizens have interesting ideas on. But in Berlin from 2008 onwards, as in most parts of Europe, there were budget cuts. So how do you do participatory budgeting, co-commissioning, when there's a budget cut? Do you say to people, what should we cut? Well, it's a crazy question. It's stupid because you know the answer already. They're going to say, cut services I don't use. So cut services used by people I don't like. Of course. So why would you ask? Berlin-Lichtenberg, one borough of the city of Berlin, brought people together in social care, for example, and said, we're cutting your budget. Sorry, we have to. What are you going to do? Which bit of your budget should we cut? And if we cut it, what will be the consequence? What damage will occur? And is there anybody in the room who can help? Let's talk. This is real. This isn't which services should we cut in theory. It's your budget's being cut. What are you going to do? And what can we do to make that less damaging? Yeah? It's an interesting way of getting people to think seriously about what they're doing, how they can help each other, etc. So that was the first co-commissioning. Co-design examples are innovation labs with service users, designing communication tools like websites, flyers, newsletters, the personalization agenda, getting people to design services that really work for them, neighborhood redesign of services, which actually the OP often does, I think. It's often a neighborhood-based redesign of services rather than a recommissioning of services. And the example I'm going to use here is Stockport Council, which some years ago looked at its website for old people and realized hardly anybody was using it. So they asked the service users why, they asked the old people, why do you not use the website? And first of all, old people said, well, we haven't got a computer. To which the answer is, boy, do we have computers. Every library, every council office, come and use the computer and we'll teach. But still people weren't using the computer. So they said, why not? And they said, the old people who were service clients said, look at your website. It's incredibly boring. It's badly designed, it's dull, and it doesn't tell us what we want to know. What do you want to know? Well, for example, you tell us what services you have, but you don't tell me whether I might get that service. Am I eligible for that service? I know some people are eligible, some are not. Okay, we'll put a little module in. You describe your conditions, and it will tell you approximately if you're likely to be eligible or not. The website use went up. But not all that much. So more focus groups. What is wrong with you? Why are you not using the website? And the answer came, we know you charge. There's a price. How much does it cost? Now that's difficult. We have to send someone to your house with a list. We ask to see your bank statements, your welfare payments, how much you spend on your children or your grandchildren, and then we decide how much you pay. It's a major financial operation. And people said, okay, approximately how much will it cost? Somebody like me, how much do people like me in the last 3 months pay for this? So, with great reluctance, because accountants love accuracy, accuracy above relevance, they put a little module which said how much it might cost. And then people used the website a lot. They used it so much that it greatly reduced the number of stupid inquiries to the telephone service, to staff when they visited people, at the offices. They so much reduced stupid staff time wasted on daft inquiries. They reckoned they were saving £300,000 a year. That's 1.5 million reais a year. Because staff were now doing something useful, not answering basic questions that are available on a website. So I'm thinking to myself, do you use your service users to make sure your website is appropriate? I ask that question around the world, and I find some great examples. And if you write to me, if you email me, I'll put you in touch with some people who do this. But I also find that the majority of public servants are not doing this at the moment, and I ask myself why. So we've done co-commissioning, co-design. Co-delivery approaches include things like promoting and supporting self-medication and self-care, trusting our service users to do that, peer support groups in mental health, expert patient experiments, social media surgeries, where people help each other because they are experts by experience, volunteers working with public services, community asset transfer, so the public sector gives some assets or leases some assets to the third sector to manage them on behalf of the public sector because they can do that more effectively locally. Community organizers who find ways of making public services work better in the local area by bringing citizens in. Street champions like Streetwatch, etc. My case study is Speedwatch. I don't know if this would work in Brazil, but in our villages in Britain, we have people who drive fast cars through the village. Dangerous, and it really annoys the villagers. So question, how do you reduce this? There are no police there. The police are 30 kilometers away in a police station, you know. How do you stop this? The answer is very simple. You give the villagers a gun. A laser gun, which takes a photograph of the car and the speed on the photograph, which shows an illegal speed, and it has the car number plate. So the villagers organize to use the laser gun. Then the local authority gives them letterheading, paper, which says Medway Village Council, and there is a letter which says, this is your car, this is your speed, it's above the legal limit. We're angry, you're dangerous, please don't do this again. The second letter comes, you've done it again. This is the second time, you know. Now we're really annoyed. We will tell everybody if you ever do that. Third time, now we're really angry. If you ever do this again, we will take you to court, we will put you in jail, we will tell your family what a horrible person. Of course, this is nonsense because actually the police have no interest in this. They would never be sent to court. This is a low priority crime. But these letters have an effect. First of all, many of the people who are speeding come from the village. Oh, how embarrassing. Your own villagers have photographed you speeding in your car through the... Secondly, other people hate getting these letters, so they don't speed anymore. These initiatives have been evaluated. They typically reduce the number of speeding cars by between 30% and 70%. Quite big effects. And of course, there may be other benefits. Co-production works by bringing people together. That's why it's called co-production. So there may be other benefits. Look at these people here. They're out of the house. They're in the street. They're talking to each other. They may go for a cup of tea afterwards. They may go for a pint of beer afterwards. And all our village pubs are under threat of closing these days because people buy alcohol in the supermarkets. So this may keep the village pub open. Yeah. It's an economic development initiative as well as being a speeding initiative. My other example of co-delivery is a health example. In Highlands Hospital, a rural area of Sweden, the consultant for gastroenterology discovered that the demand for his service was going up year by year, more and more patients. He had an annual checkup for all patients, good quality service, but he now had no more room in the hospital. His ward was full, and the number of patients was going up. What to do? the director of the hospital said, you've got to find some way of reducing your expenditure because we cannot afford an extra ward. So he looked at his data and he realized there was something strange. The month before the annual checkup, an unusual number of patients died. And the month after the annual checkup, an unusual number of patients died. Every year. What do you think is going on? How can this be? He concluded that it was because people had a false sense of security because of the checkup. If they got a bad pain in their stomach the month before the checkup, they would say, it's all right, I'm going to have a checkup in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then they died. The month after the checkup, if they got a bad pain in their stomach, they said, I'm fine, I've had a checkup, there's nothing wrong with me, and then they died. Because the incidence of a flare-up in your condition was not related to the checkup. It could happen at any time. So he decided 2 things. First of all, he would get the patients to learn how to describe their pain. Where is their pain? What kind of pain? What frequency? What level of sharpness? Dull or very intense? Was it an undulating pain, a changing pain, or was it stable? He taught them pain description, something that we don't do in our schools. Extraordinarily, for all of our lives, we'll be talking to the health service, and we never know how to describe what's wrong with us. He taught them. Secondly, he talked to his staff. You know, when somebody in the public sector normally answers the phone, the tradition has been to do it in the following way. Yes, which is a little off-putting. He taught his staff when the phone went to say, hello, how can I help? Oh, hello, Andre. How nice to hear from you again. It's been a long time. How's your family? Now tell me, why are you ringing? Oh, really? No, that doesn't sound. Let me just check. Tell me again what that pain is like. Yes, and where and how often? Okay, not a problem. But if it lasts for more than 2 days, ring me again and we'll check. Or, oh really? Oh, that's interesting. Could you come in later today? Actually, could you come in straight away, please? And this is co-production. The staff are able to work more easily and use the expertise of the public, and the public can use the expertise of the staff more. He got his number of deaths from gastroenteritis to the lowest level in Sweden. He won prizes. He became a Harvard Business Review case study. He's a case study on our website. I've written academic articles with him because as a consultant, he's an academic. And I've talked to his user group. His user group say, Jürgen is a saint. What he does is amazing. He really cares about us, and he brings us in. He uses our knowledge and our information. But they say no other doctor in Highlands Hospital does this, and they all hate him. Because if they worked this way, they would have to change all their practices, and they don't like it. So I think that's an interesting example of patients helping to deliver a different kind of outcome. And then my final co is co-assessment. Examples of co-assessment, surveys led by people who are using services, or communities leading the surveys, web-based rating of public services, TripAdvisor kind of approaches. We have that for all of our house doctors, our family doctors in the UK. When you've had a visit to the family doctor, you're asked to fill out a web rating. An action-oriented complaint system, turning complainers into volunteers. Because complainers usually are people who care. And if they care, actually they're vulnerable. Because, to give you an example, one of our local councils, when people complain about graffiti, they say to them, okay, I've got the details, we'll deal with that, we'll clean the graffiti from the local wall, the garages around your house, we'll do that, you're on the rota, 6 weeks time, 12 weeks time, we'll be there. But wait a moment, could you help? Because if you could help and bring somebody with you, 2 of you, I'll send someone, they'll have coats, they'll have brushes, all the chemicals, and you can do it together, and we could do that on Friday morning. Would that? Are you interested? And many people say yes, and when they do it, they're then asked, you've helped in this environmental project, we're really delighted. Can I give you a badge which says Solihull Environmental Champion? Can I put you on the mailing list? And when we have other projects, would you like to do that? Would you like to help? They got 370 environmental champions eventually who were doing projects all over the local area and even in other areas because they like to contribute. So co-assessment, people who complain become part of your champions. Citizen inspectors, tenant inspectors of housing, people using the service becoming inspectors, lots of examples of that. Peer review of services. When you review your services, you can bring citizens in to act as experts by experience because they have been a victim of, they've been a user of the service. My example, co-assessment, complaints management in London Borough of Camden. This is a tweet. Simon Redfern tweets, "Why is Russell Square locked?" A bit mean-spirited of the London Borough of Camden, isn't it? So this is a lovely little square beside Euston Station in the centre of London. I use this square myself very often. It has a statue of Gandhi in the middle. It's a really nice place, but it's locked. Simon is annoyed. He tweets. But Camden, the London Borough of Camden, do a mashup every day. Every mention of Camden and every mention of the London Borough of Camden on a list, and they check to see what people say. And if they see something interesting, they reply. So later this day, the communications team of Camden tweet, "Simon, parks were locked today due to staff shortages. We expect them open tomorrow. Please check here for updates." And it's the Camden website, the snow website, because this was the first day of the snow. And because of the snow, the staff couldn't get in, so the park was closed. Next morning, the communications team, "Hi Simon. Hi, all Camden parks are open today. Sorry for any inconvenience." And then later that day, Simon tweets, "Camden talking. Hello, I'm super impressed with this. I'm going to blog about how brilliant you are." Yeah. So two types of co-assessment here. First of all, you hear Simon complaining. Not complaining by writing a letter or standing in the council offices and shouting, "This is typical, the parks are closed again, incompetent," or telephoning and saying, "What do you think you're playing at? Why is..." He's muttering. Muttering is the most normal way of complaining. Muttering is the way to find out what people think. He's just saying, "Oh, it's annoying," you know? So you find out what people really think for free. Twitter is free and in real time, yeah? And second type of co-assessment, when you respond, they tell him the park is open. He tells you whether that helps or doesn't help. On this occasion, he says, "Well done," good news. On other occasions, he might say, "Not so well done." So actually, in 2018, co-assessment is now really easy. Camden, at this time, some years ago, reckoned that 65% of their adult population were on Twitter or Facebook. Now it's over 80%. So you have immediate co-assessment with your population in real time, and almost for free. If you have a budget for communications, for assessment, you can then use that budget for the 20% of people who are not on social media. I'm going to skip that. Okay, I've got a lot of slides here which are about the level of co-production, the level of citizen contribution through different countries in the world. You will see these slides, co-production in 5 European countries, a project we did some years ago for the European Union. You can see more co-production was in environmental improvement. Health improvement was the next most common category. Then crime prevention, and lower, but still quite high, crime reporting. We showed how co-production differed between countries. Individual co-production, that's people acting alone. The UK was right up there, the most, 65, an index of 65% of individuals co-producing with the public sector. Denmark was at the bottom. But when we look at collective co-production, people getting into groups to co-produce with the state, that's a different order, because individual co-production and collective co-production, they are quite different types of activity. We asked people, would you be willing to do more to help the public sector? 43% said they were willing to do a few more hours a month. 28% said a few more hours a week. Of course, they're lying. They won't do that when you ask them, but they think they want to. It's a very great deal more than is actually doing anything at the moment. It does appear we're not tapping the full potential. We repeated the survey in Australia some years later. Very similar results. We repeated the survey in Germany again in 2014, this time asking people, in the last 12 months, have you engaged with your local authority in the planning of services for young people or old people? 8% said yes. In the last 12 months, have you made proposals to your local authority to improve the quality of life of older or younger people? 9%. In the last 12 months, have you worked with your local authority to support older or younger people? Up to 12% in the case of older people. Have you pointed out to your local authority problems of older people? Younger or older people, 14%. These are the 4 co's: co-commissioning, co-design, co-delivery, co-assessment. The answer is quite a lot of people do. We did focus groups with the staff of these services in 4 different large cities in Germany, and they said people don't do much at all. So there's a paradox here. The public sector doesn't see this, but the public sees this. The public believes it is doing things that help. And we in the public sector miss it. We don't notice it. Because we're so intrigued by what we do, we don't see what other people are doing. So there's a mismatch of expectations. The final thing I want to do, what are the benefits of co-production? Formal volunteering in the UK, estimates suggest that that contributes something between 25% and 75% of economic output, gross domestic product. And the value of social care in the UK is estimated as £80 billion a year, 4 times larger than the amount of formal paid social care in Britain. But the last thing I want to say is, 2 last things I want to say. One is potential limitations. Co-production isn't an answer for everything. Not everyone wants to co-produce. And it's possible that not everyone can co-produce, although we think most people have some contribution to make, but we shouldn't insist on that. We don't know that. We need a variety of service models. We're simply suggesting that maybe co-production should be given more emphasis. Secondly, co-production is generally not free. It needs investment. It needs support from public services. And thirdly, there is a question about whether it's risky to bring the public in. And that brings me to my last point. Yes, it probably is risky to ask the public to help us with the planning of services, the design of services, the delivery of services, the assessment of services. But don't you think that the way we do it at the moment is risky? How risky is it if you don't ask the people who are most knowledgeable about what the service is like, most concerned about making the service better? How risky is it to do it just because you think you know better as a professional? I think part of our problem here is we can see the risks to us as professionals if we give more roles to the citizens. We can't see how big a risk our present services are to the service users. And if they were more responsible for decisions and action, maybe the risk to them would be much lower. Okay, maybe the risk to us would be a bit higher. But which is the right balance? I think they're paying for the service. Yeah? So some big issues there. And the last point I want to make is there is a strong possibility that co-production is also playing a major role in resilience. We've come to realize that risk is not the most important thing in public services. We've come to realize you need to take risks to improve. To improve, you need to innovate. You need to experiment. You need to learn. All innovation and experimenting and learning is partly risky, but it leads to higher outcomes. We need risky behavior. We need it desperately to learn. What we therefore need is a resilience system so that when risks happen, when we take a risk and things go wrong, which sometimes will happen, when we take a risk and things go wrong, our service users are resilient. I have a slide for this a little later here. our service users are resilient, so that they can cope with some of the things that go wrong. The community is resilient, so that people step in and help each other when things go wrong through taking risks. Service providers are resilient, so each service provider knows how to cope when his or her service fails, which will happen from time to time, especially if you're innovating. And the provider system is resilient in that if one provider simply isn't able to do their job any longer, they go bankrupt, or they get found guilty of corruption, or the service system is able to repeat what they do reasonably well. A resilient system has users who are resilient, communities who are resilient, providers who are resilient, and an overall system which is resilient, so that when things go wrong, it adapts successfully to get us back at least to the previous level of outcomes. We have not planned public services like that, but we need to. We need to take more risks, and therefore we need to be better at resilience. And our argument in our work at the moment is that co-production, bringing citizens in, bringing communities in, allows them to learn how to be more resilient, both as users and communities, and increases the resilience of the system. We have a paper on that, which we've been recently developing, and we'd be delighted to send it to you and to talk about it and to work with you on that. So those are some thoughts, some international experiences of co-production, some optimistic thoughts that maybe bringing citizens into our public services will increase the resources available, relevant resources of people who know about services and care about resources, but also some caveats. This is not a panacea. This doesn't solve all problems, but it might be an interesting way to change the balance of what we do at the moment. I'll be intrigued to hear your thoughts. My email address is at the end of the slide pack, and even if today you don't get a chance to ask a question, I'm hoping we can continue this dialogue. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Really, thank you, Professor Tony. We can open for questions now.
Thank you, Tony, for your excellent lecture. It was delightful to listen to it. So I was wondering about the better place for co-production to happen. Is there any data, any research on which is better, bringing people in or having the public organizations there in the community?
That is a fascinating question, and the answer is no. We have no systematic data. At the moment, we mainly have large numbers of case studies in the literature which prove the potential importance of co-production in specific instances. But to answer your question, we need to see the pattern. And for the moment, those patterns are not clear. It seems clear that some services are much more likely to benefit from co-production, like for all services where connecting people together will increase outcomes. And that includes social care, and it probably includes health. It certainly includes education. It probably includes community safety. All these services will benefit from bringing people together because of the connections they make, which are self-reinforcing and produce synergy. So those are good places for co-production. But whether we should bring them into our education services, our schools, or bring them into our social care system or our community safety system, or go out to them and say, what are you doing? How can I help it? How can I make it more effective? We have no patterns which allow us to say which is the best way. So I'm an academic, so you must understand my answer has to be to any question, including this one, it depends. You know? And unfortunately, in this case, I can't go much further. Often you say it depends, but usually, in this case, we're not sure. I think, to be honest, in most countries, the answer is simple at the moment. In most countries around the world, public expenditure is under pressure. There are cuts in public spending. And what governments expect, what politicians expect from co-production, is that we can bring citizens into what we do and reduce our public sector resources. We can do this in order to reduce public sector input. And I think that's an honorable thing to do, as long as we choose ways of bringing in citizens that genuinely use their capabilities well and make them feel it's worthwhile doing. My suspicion is that there will come a time when we'll realize that's a very narrow and limited way of using co-production, and there will be far greater gains to be made by sending our staff out into the streets to do good, to help people with their wonderful capabilities. Our staff are great people. Only a tiny part of their capabilities currently being used. And that's because most of them are sitting in offices filling out forms.
Yes, that's a criticism here in Brazil, because as you know, society maintains us here. And so some of the criticisms that we have is that we don't know the reality outside. We live in an island. So that's why I put that question.
I love that. One way of testing this, perhaps not this year, maybe next year or the year afterwards, would be to close all public offices for 3 months. So the staff have to go out and meet people, talk to the service users, increase their quality of life on the streets, in the houses. Or maybe that's too crude. Maybe just close public offices 4 days a week so that you can get back to the office. One very famous American entrepreneur, Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, said he always tries to get back to his head office late Friday afternoon. He doesn't like his staff to think that he's abandoned them. The rest of the time he's in his stores, his 5,000 stores, talking to customers, because how else would you run a business? An unusual approach. I do think we need to become more imaginative about getting our staff into the lives of our citizens.
Thank you very much.
Tony, I would like to ask a question, because I really agree with the idea of co-production, and I think it would be great if we were able to implement it well. But I see that putting in the Brazil's perspective, we as a country and our culture, we have the idea that the public sector is there to serve us, and we're only users, and we don't belong in the delivery of the process and in the participation. So we're only a passive individual that receives the service. So how to engage people and to make them participate and want to participate, and not just be like complaining about the problem and waiting for a savior to solve all the problems. How to really put them to work with the public sector.
I suppose the first obvious answer is make them an attractive offer. And we don't really know what they would enjoy doing. We know what we want them to do. We should be designing some of this from bottom up and saying, what would they like to do with us? Second thing, go where they are. We say to them, come to our services and co-produce. There's an old saying, if you want to catch fish, don't fish in the water beside you, fish in the pool where the fish are. So go to the fish, and where are our customers? They're in doctor's surgeries, they're in hospital waiting rooms, they're outside school gates, they're beside community centers, they're in pubs. You know, if you want to talk to young people, the time to find young people is Friday and Saturday night in the pubs. That's when you go and ask them, hey, can you help us? That means you have to go there with somebody credible. Anyone over the age of 25 who goes to a pub on a Friday night and says to young people, we need some help. There are some drug addicts here, there are some drug dealers in the street. We need your help. We need to find them. We need to get some evidence. Yeah, we need anyone over the age of 25 who goes to a pub and asks for help is disqualified. They're not credible. Yeah, so we need to have people who introduce us to services. Go where they are, and make sure the people who go look credible and make them an interesting offer. Yeah. So that's one way into this. But I think we shouldn't overestimate how difficult it is to get citizens involved. When we do focus groups, we find all citizens are doing something useful to help other people. often the public sector doesn't see it. We're not good at knowing about this. And when we hear the response, we don't want to help you, we don't want to help the public sector because we've paid our taxes, and we expect the public sector to do the work. And we hear that quite often, particularly in Scandinavia, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, they pay high taxes and they have high quality public services. So of course, they often say, co-production, nonsense. I pay big taxes. The public sector should do this. You then say, so does the public sector really do this service well? And they say, well, yes, but not very well, quite well. And you say, and do you think some of your knowledge might help them make it better? And they say, yep. And you say, and if you gave them that information, if you gave them that knowledge, if you worked with them, would that actually improve the services and the quality of life? Probably. And how would you feel? Would you like to do something like that? Would it make you feel good? A lot of people say, well, yes. Yes, I've been talking about this for years and they never pay any attention, yeah? And you say, fine, sign up, name and address, email, we'll be in touch, you know? But they still believe they shouldn't do this, the public sector should do it. So people, in that sense, are schizoid, you know? At one level they think they shouldn't, and at another level they tell you forcefully, unless they do it, the public service will not be good. And I think that's not just a Scandinavian thing. It's most obvious in Scandinavia, but I think all citizens think, on the one hand, I shouldn't have to do this, but on the other hand, I would be good at it, and actually, I'm bored, I'm lonely, I'd quite like to help.
No, you brought the Scandinavian example, and I think Brazil is quite the opposite. So we pay high taxes, but we get really poor services. So
this is a difficult combination.
Exactly, and then the point that you said, oh, we have good services, but I want to make it better. Here, I think the public sentiment is that we pay extremely high taxes, and then we don't get any services. And then I'm working every day until I get extremely tired, and all I want to do is get home and relax. You know, I don't want to have another job just to secure a better service that will probably not become reality.
That degree of skepticism is understandable. To rebut skepticism, you have to have some good case studies. And those case studies can't just be on the website. They have to be in the mouth of somebody on the street. So you need to prove that sometimes citizens do good work, it changes things, and the result is worth having. And that has to be said by somebody who isn't a public servant. It has to be somebody on the street who works with you, who tells people that. I've spent some time in Recife, in the favelas there, and I was astonished to find how many people in the favelas are doing things to help each other, partly because the local authority, the municipality, isn't doing much to help them. Although I was brought there by the mayor's staff from the municipality, so I saw mainly the side of the favelas where people are working partly with the public sector. But I was amazed that these very poor, poorly educated, very tired people whose life is highly risky and has many disadvantages actually find time to help other people, and some of them were helping themselves. I was surprised to find some of them are doing degrees at the local college, for example, but they're helping each other on the street, and they feel better because there is some kind of social glue, social solidarity, social capital in those areas, although it's tenuous. It can easily be broken, it can easily disappear. So I think starting somewhere is important. and secondly, using people who are credible to carry the message, and that means peer group, people just like the people you want to attract. They are the credible messengers, peer groups, not old white men like me, you know, and not necessarily very highly educated people like you. It has to be people like them that tell them the message. So you have to find those people, engage them, convince them, bring them in, and then use them as a message. It won't solve all problems, but I think we could do better than we do at the moment.
Tony, We have a question here sent by Sharmila, online audience. Well, Sharmila is at the School of Governance in Health at Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, called Fiocruz here in Brazil. She asked, Professor Bovaird is talking about referring to as coproduction, as in fact we called citizen science, something that we have been developing with local social networks. Well, it would be brilliant if he could comment on whether he acknowledges Jesenov's concept of coproduction and or citizen science.
Thank you very much for that question, Sharmila. That's interesting. I think I've already said that we believe you should find your own definition of co-production. The characteristic of co-production is an intense contribution by both of two parties, professionals in the public sector and citizens. Now, there are many concepts around like participation, engagement, consultation. I've not heard the phrase citizen science before, so thank you for educating me. There are many other ways of talking about bringing citizens together and bringing citizens together with public services. We think that definition is not the key thing here. The key thing is finding ways to make it work better. So I don't know Jesenov's definition and research on co-production, but it sounds exciting, and I congratulate you for being involved in this, and I hope you'll get in touch and tell me both how you do it and some of the results of doing it. We have approximately 70 case studies on our website, 70 case studies of co-production according to our definition from around the world. We're always looking for more case studies, so I would invite you and indeed all of our online audience and the large group of people here in the room in USP to consider doing a case study for us. We would like that very much indeed. And we'd like a dialogue too about better ways of making co-production work. And if you have found some of those through your approach to citizen science, that could be enormously valuable. So thank you very much indeed for getting in touch.
Yeah?
Hello, Tony. Thank you for your presentation today. I would like to propose a question about cultural aspects of different countries and the approach to co-production. Co-production in your presentation and in most of what I've been reading about it is seen like a always positive way. It's always a good thing. But in some extent, I think that in countries where there is a more clientelistic tradition, it should be impose some dark sides. So co-production might be in different cultural contexts or institutional contexts, the outcomes of co-production might be not that good for society in general, but specific to groups from society, communities. How do you see the impacts of clientelism, for example, in co-production approaches in different countries?
That's a good question, Andre. You are absolutely right that co-production is often talked about as a purely positive phenomenon, and that's crazy. All things that people do, even when they're normally positive, can be done so badly that they become really evil. So if we do co-production badly, then that's the dark side, and we shouldn't encourage that. If co-production is done through corrupt ways, so we only bring citizens in where those citizens are likely to benefit a lot, and they are from a select group, if they're from our class, if they're from our race, if they're from our gender, if they're from our religion, If we only give them the advantages, then of course the results may well turn out to be poor. Although not necessarily. Here's the strange thing about co-production. If it allows you to do things better, cheaper, you're giving the advantages of co-production to the group who are involved, and that makes them better off. But hey, you're saving money. And you might use that money for other groups, for even more disadvantaged groups. So you have to look at the system-wide effect. I'm not against co-production, which is essentially, in some services, for old white men like me from the middle classes of the Christian religion. I'm not against it in principle, if it means that we do so much that we free up a lot of budget that the local authority can use for more worthy groups who need public help. I can see there are advantages there. But we must look at the system effects and ask, do we like the benefits more than the costs? That's true of any service intervention. Co-production, like every service intervention, is not a good thing in itself. The question is, are the benefits it brings more than the costs to society which it imposes? And we've not been very good at working that out so far. And we've tended to concentrate on case studies which definitely work for the people involved. We haven't therefore necessarily looked at the system-wide effect, and I think your question is a very sensible one. It alerts us to the fact that our analysis of co-production up to now may have been a little narrow, and it may have been about subsystems. Nevertheless, I'm pretty confident that most of our 70 case studies on our website are for high priority groups, and therefore they seem to be on the bright side rather than the dark side. We have to check, however.
Hi, Tony. You gave us some examples of co-production in a more local level, like the village or the favelas here in Brazil. But what I want to know is, do you have some examples of bigger actions in co-production? I mean, in a big scale, a whole city or a country?
No, certainly not. We've been doing some research today. Professor Andre Aquino and his colleagues and myself are launching into a project on obstacles to co-production. And wherever we've been examining these obstacles to co-production, we notice that they differ between different services, between different departments of government, between different government agencies, and even sometimes between different branches of a government department or a municipal department or a state department. We have never found a co-production initiative which seems to be genuinely statewide or countrywide or service-wide. I suppose the closest example is the personalization agenda with personal budgets in social care for people with disabilities, particularly people with physical disabilities and with learning difficulties. It's a little bit like the Bolsa Familia in Brazil. But actually, the way in which that project has been, the way in which that policy has been implemented, it seems to be countrywide in the UK, in England. The way in which it's been implemented means that there are quite substantial differences between different cities and even within a city between different groups. So I don't think we have any macro examples of co-production. And I'm not sure that I want them. I want co-production to be relevant, specific to different circumstances. I think co-production as an approach to government policy needs to be context-specific, and therefore making it service-wide, city-wide, countrywide might be a mistake. I'm not sure, but I'm hoping that maybe your research will inform us, because I know that you're now going to launch into some further co-production research, so maybe the world is waiting for your answer on this.
Tony, would you say that the reason is that the central government is far? That the citizens that is receiving the service rather than the local government that's near.
That's a very interesting point. I agree with you, Andre. In my bones, I feel that co-production is more relevant and more easy at local government level, because local government officers are closer to citizens in general and also see the specific context more easily and therefore can be more relevant in their intervention. But I've been challenged on that view in this last week in Brasilia. I've spent a week talking to the ministries in Brasilia about co-production and about improving performance of public services. And I find that many of the staff in Brasilia, in the ministries on the Esplanade, they're saying that they think co-production with citizens is relevant to them. So maybe I've misjudged the potential for high-level bureaucrats at federal level to really bring citizens into some elements of their work. But I must admit, it still seems to me easier at the local government level.
Would be great if we could extend such participatory approach to central government. Maybe the technology could enhance the possibilities to achieve the local citizens.
That's a very good point. I think digital gives everyone the chance to get closer to other relevant people. And maybe digital means that context specific isn't such a big factor in the future as it has traditionally been. And I certainly met people in some of the ministries in Brasilia who are absolutely confident that there are certain groups of the population who can definitely make their services better. Whether that is likely to be such a large movement, such a large effect, as is likely to work at local government level, remains to be seen.
Perfect. Anything? No? Tony, thank you for your presentation, to be here, to help us to run this project. We'll be running such projects for the next 3 years, trying to identify good examples and trying to enhance the possibilities to use co-production at local governments, regional, and who knows, central governments. We hope we can enhance them also. Thank you so much, and to be here, and thank you again.
Andre, thank you very much indeed. It's been a privilege. I would encourage everyone who's been watching and listening to get in touch by email and talk about what you're doing, the extent to which it might have lessons for other people. Perhaps you might do a case study, and the extent to which you might contribute to our research, which is into the obstacles to doing more co-production and strategies for overcoming those obstacles. So thank you all for your attention.